Hi everyone, thank you for joining. Today we're going to be looking at driving trust and engagement, the PMO's role in executive decision making. My name is Greg Hocking. I'm the Head of Business Development at Fluid. I've been working for Fluid for multiple years, working in partnership with PMOs and project teams, helping transform their project delivery. I've also worked with a number of sort of senior executive stakeholders, allowing them to make clear, transparent decision making through our portfolio level dashboards. I'm also joined here today by Dan Justin, Fluid's founder. I'll let you introduce yourself, Dan.
Yeah, hi everyone. Excited to be here today. I'm Dan. I am the CEO and founder of Fluid, as Greg said, and I started Fluid back in 2014 after working in PMOs in financial services sector in the UK, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, that type of organisation. And we've been really focusing on the needs of the PMO and the portfolios over the last 10 years. So excited to share that with you today.
Excellent. So today we're going to be looking through a few different value props around the PMO and a few different sort of key pointers. So looking at how the PMO has evolved and redefined themselves in different business environments. We're also going to be looking at how PMOs can help establish that trust with executives, how PMOs can look to align themselves with different business strategies, handling good and bad news, as well as looking at risk management related to the PMO as well. And then we'll also talk at the end at how to measure a PMO success with key performance indicators, so KPIs related to projects. So starting off, Dan, I think it'd be great just to look at how the PMOs have evolved. So, I mean, in your sort of perspective, what would you say have been the changes in the last sort of 10 to 15 years with the PMO? What changes have you noticed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The PMO has really gone through various life cycles over the last 15 years, and it's evolved from one of being an administration function, so really there just to organize project managers to make sure their reports are done on time, so operational. And from there, it fell out of fashion a bit in many organizations because your senior stakeholders felt it was an overhead to getting projects delivered. And so for a good period of time, 5 years maybe, it was considered not a fashionable thing to be putting into your organization. There were still a few PMOs out there, and I guess you would call them project administration officers. And recently, over the last couple of years, the trend has changed, and the PMO has started to engage with the organization at a different level. It's become much more strategically aligned, and I think you'll see that executives and decision makers are looking for the PMO to do a different type of role in organizations today, one that really aligns to the business rather than just simply operations.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's something I've noticed a lot in conversations that I'm having with heads of PMOs, and they're changing positioning around organizations. We also sat down earlier in the week with David Zweyer, the Senior Vice President of IT Strategy and Transformation at Ascot Group Insurance, and we asked him his perspective on the changing narrative of the PMO.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, that kind of the start of this in terms of how do you establish the trust from executive leadership for the PMO and what the value proposition is. And, whether you're standing up a PMO or an EPMO from scratch, or you're trying to mature an existing PMO, or maybe even transition from one type of a PMO to a more strategic type of PMO, you do have to define ultimately the charter of your PMO. I think that's the start, and including your mission, your vision, and then ultimately your value proposition. And you have to write it down, and you have to socialize it, and you have to get buy-in from executive leadership. You can't just start the PMO and start doing activities and then expect that people are going to get on board, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You absolutely have to be deliberate about writing down the mission, vision, values, the mandates and ultimately what that value proposition is going to be. And I mean, I believe it. In most organizations, you actually need buy-in from the CEO. Obviously that depends on the size of the organization, how it's structured. But if the leader of the PMO is anywhere close to kind of the top of the organization, having the CEO understand that mission, vision, the value prop, and the other key executive stakeholders. So whether it's a CFO, depending on where your PMO, your EPMO sits, whether it's in IT or outside of IT, you may need to do that with the CIO. If that EPMO sits outside of IT, you're going to need that strong relationship and support from the CIO. And then ultimately with the business area leads as well, that you're going to ultimately be supporting to help advance their strategy. So getting that buy-in, so getting the charter, getting a clear mission, vision, and value prop, and then getting buy-in from the executive team. That's how you start. That's the key.
Well, that was really interesting insight from David there. What really struck me was how the charter is being utilized there by the PMO. I mean, what's your perspective on that, Dan?
Yeah, it's really interesting how he's using day-to-day project governance frameworks to think about his PMO as an initiative, as something that delivers value and that has benefit to the organization. So it's something I think we can all take a lesson from there, which is it's okay to use the same types of governance in your PMO as you do in your projects. So one example for that might be a steering committee or a set of value benefits statements for your PMO. So set up a plan, set up a set of risks and issues, set up a benefit statement, and report on your PMO as if it's an initiative on the business. And that can really help communicate out what you're doing in the PMO to drive change and to build value for that business.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about the benefits realized from projects. And one of the key benefits I'm realizing from PMOs and the projects that they're completing is alignment to business strategy. Something that I'm speaking with multiple clients about is how to align PMOs to business strategy. We sat down with David as well to discuss his perspective on alignment of PMOs to organizational strategy.
Right. Yeah. So the team really needs the PMO team, the PMO leader, and the PMO members really need to first and foremost understand the organization's business strategy. Right. As you said, previously PMOs were focused on more tactical activities with their project management. Could be seen as more of an administrative function. Maybe weren't as close to the strategy. We're really just focused on that. Am I executing the triple constraint, the cost, schedule, scope of a particular project, and didn't necessarily understand what are the outcomes that were trying to be achieved or the benefits? How does it tie to the organization's strategy, the organization's view of the marketplace? To be a strategic PMO, to be a member of a strategic PMO, you have to understand that business strategy in your organization. And that's a different mindset change versus just understanding project management or understanding this, particular domain within the PM. You need to understand that business strategy and then be able to sit with your business stakeholders, the sponsors of those strategic initiatives, and show them you understand it and show them that you can help them achieve their business outcomes and benefits, because that's the key. That's where this is all going in terms of the value proposition. It's not just the execution of the project and getting it into production and then everyone celebrating and moving on to the next thing. It's, are we achieving the business outcomes and the benefits? That's what we're looking to do with our business sponsors in partnership with the PMO. So that's the most important part.
I found that really insightful, understanding what David was saying there about engaging with different stakeholders and understanding about, is the business achieving the desired outcomes with the best benefits from projects, and ensuring that stakeholders, business sponsors work in partnership with the PMO. So Dan, I suppose, what practical measures do you have that those that work in PMOs can take in order to gain that the stakeholder trust there?
Yeah, that's a good point. And, it's all about understanding what you need from your stakeholders at different parts of the project life cycle. So, we've all spoken about, we've all used RACI to establish a clear understanding about who's doing what when in a project life cycle. But let's break it down a little bit and talk about engaging stakeholders earlier on in the life cycle. So bringing them into the process so that they have a chance to contribute, they understand the risks, they understand the decision making and the prioritization. So let's look at, for example, intake, ideation. Right? If you can bring your stakeholders in, so whether that's the heads of business or even people, SMEs across the business who have a real clear understanding about how the business operates, what it's trying to achieve, KPIs, the market conditions, that type of thing, right? You want to be having conversations in your planning processes which are talking about how the business is planning, not necessarily about just planning units of work. As David spoke about, the triple constraint of, well, I've got some budget, I've got some time, and I've got some resources. That doesn't equal a green light for a project. You need to, if that project or that exercise is not going the direction the business needs it to go, then what's the point of doing it, right? So first things first, establish a clear communication about the process of intake. Get people talking about what they need to do sooner and get them engaged in the process. That can start with rough orders of magnitude, t-shirt sizing, whiteboarding into big strategy buckets. There's lots of practical ways you can bring people into a conversation. You can even get everyone in a room with a bunch of whiteboards and start putting post-it notes on things saying, this is important to me, this is important to me, right? It's got to be an engagement. You've got to have people thinking, well, that was actually quite a useful exercise. Then you go through into the project delivery, the project execution, right? So what do we need from our stakeholders there? We need them to be engaged. We need to be making decisions. We need them to be saying, yes, move forward. No, that risk is not an issue, that type of thing. Risks are not issues. There you go. But the point is, we need to be engaging them on a regular basis so that they're connected with the project as well. They're connected with what we're trying to achieve, and they're connected with the efforts that's going into it. So I would look at things like setting up regular steercos, even if they're offline, even if they're run asynchronously, digitally. You need to establish a clear, consistent communication protocol. So standard reporting, making sure that the things that you send to them every week, every month are the same format, the same standards, the same across all of the projects that they're looking at, right? You need reliability and consistency for people to be able to make quick decisions and to be able to process information quickly, right? You don't want your senior executives having to plow through a 1,000-line Gantt chart because, oh, that's what I've been given, right? So think about what they need in order to be able to make decisions. And of course, what I think really also is important is talking about the benefits that project is trying to realize much earlier on in the project, right? Talking about the risks that may impact that project, talking about risks that may impact the business very early in the project life cycle. The more visibility you have on those things, the better it is, the more your stakeholders will be engaged. And of course, after the project, bring them in, make sure you have lessons learned, find out what they thought was good about the project, right? Recycle that, get those lessons learned, and then take them back into the planning process. You want to have your stakeholders in the life cycle throughout.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Dan, especially around, you mentioned decision making there, and I think that's something that's really important, is ensuring clear, transparent, and accountable decision making. So I think, yeah, let's transition over to David and hear David's thoughts around accountability for decision making.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so as part of the charter of the PMO, what you're doing is ultimately employing effective governance for the organization. And part of effective governance is clear accountability and clear decision-making authority, and documenting that and getting agreement on that. That's one thing that can really become an issue in organizations when there's unclear accountability. Most PMs know the RACI matrix, right? We all learn that. And we may, have varying degrees of how we feel about that, but it actually is a really important artifact, especially when you're talking about governance in the organization, not just project governance, because it does clearly articulate who's ultimately accountable for certain things, who can make decisions. Decision rights matrix, also, which clearly articulates which decisions can be made at what level by what governing body. Having all of that clear when you're setting up governance in the organization is just absolutely critical, to be able to make, to your point, as we look to be more agile, little a agile, not necessarily big A agile, little a agile, and make decisions quicker, move forward faster, maybe change directions, funding, etc. Having a clear decision-making matrix and accountability is just absolutely critical.
Yeah, I found that really interesting what David was saying there around a clear sort of stakeholder engagement. One of the ways in which I've seen some of our clients which are utilizing Fluid is they've built out personalized dashboards for each of their different stakeholders. This helps to sort of de-noise from some of the projects or some of the strategy that may not be particularly relevant to those different business sponsors or stakeholders. So they've got their own personalized views for the projects which are relevant for themselves. Another way in which I've seen is collaboration. So utilizing our chat channels within Fluid, they'll tag stakeholders to get those key decisions, to get their opinions, get their perspectives on projects. And ensure that they can continue to drive those projects forward and with the stakeholder buy-in. Another way in which I've seen is those RAG status updates. I mean, it's one of the core tenets of project management is in terms of having those clear status updates, so stakeholders are aware as to the progress of projects.
Yeah, well, you say status reports, but the thing that comes directly to my mind when we talk about status reports is watermelons, which is an odd thing to say, isn't it? But you know what a watermelon is? It's green on the outside and red on the inside, right? And I think it's fair to say there's a lot of projects out there that are watermelons, and there's multiple reasons for that. But one of those is people's reticence to provide bad updates, bad news, and to say that things aren't going well. So transparency helps with that by having live data, by having live reporting and more consistent updates. As you were saying, if you've got people in the process more often, they can engage, and then it doesn't feel like such a big gap between the last time you spoke to them. It doesn't go off a cliff, And so I think engaging people is a good way to kill off those watermelons. But also fundamentally, you need to build a culture where people feel open and feel positive about providing updates that aren't positive. It needs to not be a negative connotation for you to say, well, actually the project's not doing well. It might not even be anyone's fault. It could be that something happened external to the company and now we're red. So building a culture of being able to talk about negative things is really important. And David has some excellent comments and thoughts on how to do that. So let's go over and listen to him now.
So the key to that is to report the news before it becomes bad news. And that means effective risk management of your initiatives and being transparent when you're managing those risks and the different things that may pose a risk to the project's health and the delivery or the benefit realization. And so being very transparent with clear, objective communication on the status of the initiative, on the status of the achievement of the outcomes, the benefits, the strategy on a regular basis makes the bad news communication that much easier, because you've been communicating all along. Clear expectations. I say this all the time to my team. Clear communication and proper expectation setting just goes such a long way, no matter what the subject is, and no surprises. The worst thing you can do is bad news is have it be a surprise bad news. If you've been talking about a risk for 6 months and then the risk is realized, it's a much different message, even though it can be the same impact than if you weren't reporting it for the 6 months. Perhaps the impact to the project is the same, but the fact that you are transparent and clear and objective about it makes all the difference.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think we can all paraphrase that by simply saying proactive risk management is better than reactive issue triage every day.
Yeah, definitely, Dan. That's something as well. A lot of the clients that I deal with, in terms of proactive risk management, one of the ways in which they're able to do that with Fluid is our portfolio level risk dashboards. So they're able to filter and understand their different risks and then potentially issues as well across the portfolio. So being able to filter and say, like, I want to look at all my scope risks or all of my resourcing risks against multiple projects, and then being able to manage and mitigate against those, and sort of do it by an exception level rather than having to do it at an individual level.
Yeah, you don't want to have to be trawling through hundreds of project reports every week to find out where the red is, right? So thinking about risk reporting and risk cultures and risk processes in your PMO is a really great way to get out there and be proactive. And there, going back to our original conversation, being proactive enables you to go to stakeholders and be more trusted, be more aligned to what they're thinking about as well. And of course, if you think about proactive, you're also thinking about, well, how do I know which projects are going to be red? You can think about proactiveness in terms of looking at the KPIs in a project and saying something doesn't quite add up. It's all green, but it looks green, but there's indicators to say that it's trending in the wrong direction. So a PMO can have processes like quality assurance processes, and these are often done manually. You might pick a few random projects every quarter and pick them up and do a deep dive and look at the quality, look at the assessment, and say, actually, that one's not quite as green as we thought it was. So thinking about that is, as a PMO, putting processes in place which allow you to highlight the projects that are trending in the wrong direction and starting to proactively mitigate those as well. So I think it's also a great way to think about finding areas of quality in your organization, right? You have areas that deliver really well, really successfully. So you want to know what KPIs and what things those projects are doing that allow them to be successful that you can apply across the rest of the portfolio.
Yeah, that's very true. The PMO has its own key performance indicators and SLAs that it's tracking against. So yeah, let's go across now to David to hear his perspective on the different KPIs and SLAs related to PMO and how to measure those.
Yeah, so part of the development of that charter should absolutely be what the success criteria of the PMO is, right? And that should be established up front as you're getting that buy-in and advocacy from the executive team and from the stakeholders. You should be getting the buy-in on how are we judging if we're going to be successful. It's no different than the success criteria for a project. Again, it's not just the triple constraint anymore of cost, schedule, scope, quality. It's, are we realizing the business outcomes and benefits? Are we realizing the business outcomes and benefits of the PMO as well? So sometimes it's difficult to have a mindset change from kind of the operational metrics, PMO type metrics that people are used to reporting, whether it's those, CPI, SPI, like from a traditional PMI perspective, to more strategic metrics. So you do want to have a combination of those operational metrics, but you also want to have more strategic metrics so you can demonstrate the strategic value of the PMO. So you may consider like, what's the percentage of our portfolio spend that's aligned to like innovative initiatives? How much of our portfolio spending is aligned directly to our strategic priorities versus something that's not part of our strategic imperatives? Measuring the business value associated by the strategic programs, basically having a benefit realization management framework in place, you can measure that business value, those outcomes and benefits. Percentage of kind of interdependencies on cross-cutting programs to show like the management and the complexity of some of these transformational type programs. So it's those types of metrics, not just the operational metrics, but the more strategic metrics that should be established up front, agreed upon, and then measured and communicated on a regular basis to be able to show that value.
Yeah, it's really great to hear from David, and he's got a lot of experience in setting up and running PMOs. One of the things that I think really resonates there is that a PMO has to think of itself as part of the business, and it has to understand its KPIs as related to the business. So, for example, if you're a financial services organization, you're a PMO, you might have regulatory KPIs, you might have um, KPIs related to profitability if you're a PMO in a retail organization. So really, there's no one size fits all for a PMO. A PMO needs to be part of the business strategy and needs to be really aligned. And I think we've spoken about that all along today. And the PMO is really an initiative. It's something that you need to look at as a living, continuously evolving thing, and using some of the tools that you have at your disposal, like a charter, like a benefit statement, like a risk and issues log. These are all things that you can do to ensure that your PMO is continuously improving and becoming part of that business strategy, not off to the side of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the ways in which that can be done is having a platform in place to ensure that you're able to understand those key metrics, those key KPIs. You're able to have those specific dashboards for stakeholders, which we spoke about earlier, as well as allowing a communication and collaboration in context to projects, I think is also crucial. And having auditability, so having documentation, having things documented, and having governance and best practices in place around that capturing of data, I think is crucial to PMOs, and then ensuring that trust with stakeholders. Well, it's been a great conversation today with you, Dan, and thank you to David as well for joining in earlier in the week as well, to engage in our discussion around driving trust and engagement with stakeholders, and the PMO's role in that. If anyone has any comments, please feel free to reach out. The email will be at the end of this video. It'd be great as well to hear your thoughts and perspective. Also, if you have any specific questions around how a platform can be put in place to support your PMO, then please do feel free to reach out. But thank you everyone today for listening. We really appreciate your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Over 25,000 project managers, PMOs and executives trust Fluid to be their all-in-one PMO platform.